You so much, Sarah, for the
You're welcome.
introduction. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, whatever you are. I am showcasing from Los Angeles. Where's everybody at? Where's everybody located? I see somebody's in Virginia. I used to live in Virginia. I lived in Richmond for a year. That was about 11 years ago, a long time ago. And let's see, who else? Where else are we going from? More Virginia, Maryland, Ontario. Excellent. You're from LA, Susie. Oh, wonderful. Arizona. That's like right next door, Arizona. Santa Maria, California. Oh, so wonderful. Fairfax, Santa Maria. Excellent, everybody. Well, welcome. My name is Daniela Campins. I'm an artist. I'm a visual artist. I make paintings, I make drawings, and I work for Liquitex and Winsor Newton in this program called the Fine Art Collective. And, I'm here today to talk to you about inks and some mediums, and we are going to, some of us will work together to create this landscape that I've designed. And also, I'm also gonna break through the demonstration today and talk to you about some of the advantages of Liquitex inks and some of the cool mediums that you can use for this today. You should be able to follow along the demonstration, even if you don't have the exact colors. Any yellow, any blue, and any red would work. And if you don't necessarily have gotten yet the Liquitex inks, you can use any acrylic for the time being and just have fun along with us. I usually tell my students, I teach college level art classes here in Los Angeles, and I tell my students that there's nothing that just getting started with anything that you have to carry on, and then later on, as you build your skills and you're able to afford more higher end products, then you can slowly build up your toolbox of materials and start to replace some of the colors that maybe you started with, and then get professional range colors. There's something to say about the difference in between student grade and professional grade, and I will talk about that in a little while. And I'm super excited to be here. This is my first time doing an event for Plaza, so I'm thrilled, and I'm looking forward to possibilities on doing more. And I'll walk you through some of the materials that I'll be using just to also give you a little bit of time to to grab anything that you may be missing. I think that will probably be super helpful for everyone. And I'm going to actually also spotlight my overview camera at the same time. And eventually, when I begin to work, then I will just only focus on the single one, just to make it wider for you all and available. But I'm going to be using pretty much 3 colors for everything, and we'll do a little bit of color mixing. But I will have the fluorescent yellow, the phthalo blue red shade, and the rubine red. So again, if you have any yellow, any blue, or any red, that will do just fine. I have a couple of the metallic mediums. These are actually new. They were recently added. And one is the silver metallic medium, and the other one is the gold metallic medium. And, I actually don't know yet which one of the two I'm going to use. I think I'm going to be very spontaneous in which one of the two, or maybe I'll use both, depending on the colors and how the color mixing happens in my painting. I will choose to maybe warm my painting up a little bit with the gold metallic, or cool it down with the silver metallic. And I'm going to teach you how to use them, how I use them, and the different ways that this could be added and mixed with the paint, and so forth. Another medium that I have, it's the fluid masking medium. That's also a new medium. I, of course, have paper. I'm going to be working on watercolor paper. Specifically, this is called press. If you have hot press, which is the one that is a little bit smoother, you can use that as well. Or any paper that is thick enough to take washes. Sometimes Bristol will be okay. However, Bristol paper, if you add too much water, sometimes it can buckle a little bit. So I think it's beneficial to get a good thick watercolor paper for this. But again, if you only have canvas today, go ahead and work on canvas. You know, it is very flexible, as it is acrylic paint. Will go on anything. I'm going to be using these brushes right over here. These are brushes that are specifically for acrylic paint. These are Liquitex Freestyle brushes. And this will be just used for me applying the paint onto the paper. But I do have an additional brush, and I'll talk about why I have this, but I have a brush that I will only use with my masking fluid. Okay. Another things that I have laying around that you can substitute by plastic papers or plastic palettes are ceramic ramekins. I love the ceramic ramekins because they contain the color really nicely here, and I can add water and I can fit a lot of paint in here, and also the paint doesn't stick to the surface, which is really great for cleaning up. In addition to this, I also have some palette paper because I will be mixing the mediums with color. I wanted to have something where I can just really go in with the palette knife. So I also have a palette knife just in case. I have a little bit of dish soap here. Yes, so kitchen dish soap. It is clear, and I'm gonna use that to protect my brushes when I use the masking fluid medium. So this is very useful tip, and I'll talk about that as well in a minute. I have several cups with water because we want to make sure that we clean our brushes. You know, acrylic can dry very fast on our brushes, and it could ruin brushes. So having enough cups of water so that you have 1 cup for like the dirty water and the second cup for like maybe like you do like a second pass of cleaning, I think is super useful. Tons of napkins. And I think that's basically what I have here so far. And then again, please feel free to check out the list that was copied and pasted by Tara earlier on in the chat, so you can review you know, those colors and those materials that I'll be using. Okay, so you should have now a good view of my top working table. And I always recommend everybody to go to the top right area or by the screen and select full screen. That way you have a the biggest view that you can get, so that you can see any detail and more, and me mixing the paint a little bit more clearly. So I figured I just began by straight up drawing this, you know, because I know some of you will be drawing along. I want to start from scratch, right? So that you have the opportunity to also copy what I'm doing. So, you know, watercolor paper, it's actually quite delicate, and I'm always wary of drawing on it before, if I'm gonna map out a composition. So I typically like to use a pencil that is not too hard. And by too hard, I mean that sometimes when the pencils are too hard, like for example, a number HB or a number 2H, when you press against the paper, which is quite soft, this is cotton fibers, you might actually indent the paper. So I think a number 2B, which is basically a number 2 pencil, it's ideal for mapping out compositions on watercolor paper. And we're going to be doing a landscape today. And let me just show you the finished product right here. And, you know, I did this quite a while ago, so the colors might not turn exactly the same, but that's totally fine. I did a couple other iterations when I was exploring different color combinations. I tried this one right here, and then I also tried this one right over there with like with the purple sun, and I thought that looked very I don't know, out of this world, this otherworldly. So I thought that was kind of a fun one as well, to make a purple sun. You know, that doesn't really exist in nature. So I figure I'll have some fun with the colors. And I wanted to choose the fluorescent yellow because I really wanted to give the painting this really interesting glow. So I thought that was really fun. And the phthalocyanine blue, I chose it because it's very pigmented and it is a cooler blue. It is sort of like it's really nice. It gives really nice purples. And I chose the Rubine red because it is a very cool red, and it's almost like a rosy red, almost like ruby red. So that was a fun color to choose, and they're all brand new. So it's a nice way to showcase them and to show you what they look like. So when we think about something so simple like this, you know, the one thing that we want to establish is where do we want the horizon line? You know, that's something that we think about in composition when we're drawing landscape. You know, are you going to have a horizon line that's higher up? If we have the horizon line higher up, that means that we're going to have a lot of activity in the ground plane and very little sky. If I bring the horizon line down here, I'm going to have very little ocean or very little ground and a big sky. And since the painting is very much featured on this, you know, sunset scene, I really wanted to have a big area for the sun setting and then for the colors in the sky. So in order to do that, everybody, I'm just going to draw the line for the horizon line right down here. And this is quite small. This is about 6 inches by 5 inches. I think that's a good size for the time that we have in this class today. And I typically would draw a little lighter than what I'm doing right now. I just want to make sure that everybody can see what I'm doing. So I am drawing slightly darker. A tool that is really useful when I draw with watercolor is a kneaded eraser. If I ever go too dark, I can just simply tap on this or dab on this and I reduce the intensity of my line. And that's something that I can do later if I don't want the graphite pencil to show through my painting. And please ask me any questions, feel free. There's nothing ever too simple that you wanna not ask, you know, ask away. So once I got my horizon line, I wanna consider what kind of activity do I want to be going on here in the ocean? And I was thinking about rocks or pieces of, you know, of like land coming in through this area. And I think that will activate this area a little bit rather than just, you know, ocean on its own. So when we think about rocks on the ocean, you know, they usually stick out of the water. And then they usually have sort of like the edge of where the water is touching the rock. And then we can do a shape about this, something similar to that. And you could do as many as you want to. You don't have to necessarily or exactly copy what I'm doing. You can come up with your own. Maybe you can have many of them. I want to do another long one right on the left side. And it's going to be just sort of like a piece of, like a chunk of land back there. And maybe one down here to welcome the viewer into the painting. Maybe another one here. And I could do sort of like a mountain ridge right back there. And another piece of mountain ridge right in the middle. So that'll be fun to figure out the colors to use for that. And I'm actually going to be using colors that are not realistic, like not representational of how we see the world. But if you want to make your color mixes more true to what you expect to see in a real landscape, you may do that as well. I just want to have a little bit of fun with it and not necessarily be tied to the idea of something that is perfectly representational or expected. So now that I have my ground, then I want to create my large unexpected sun. So I think that is useful when you're doing curves to very lightly draw a horizontal line so that when you draw the curve, you know where to begin and then you know where to end. And I like sometimes to ghost the line. And by ghosting the line, I mean that I just kind of go back and forth with the shape that I'm trying to create before I actually do it darker, in case I'm having a little bit of a shaky day when I'm drawing. So sometimes I find that I have bad days with drawing where my hand is a little shaky. So when I do this, I just sort of like visualize better the shape. And then I just go for it and see what happens. So there's my shape. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit more curvy and round and symmetrical. And then I'm gonna get rid of this line because I don't want that one. I want the sun to be setting on the mountain ridge rather than over this line back there. Make this a little bit smaller, making a few adjustments here. And now I want to ask myself, do I like this? You know, do I think that this is going to be interesting? Do I need to make any adjustments? I don't need tweaks, you know, this is more of an exercise. So not being super picky about this. I'm just going to try to learn from the experience and see where it takes me. So I think that this is too big for my taste. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So just a minor adjustment here. If you like the way yours is, just go ahead and keep it. Okay. So the way that I came up with this idea and this painting, it is inspired by Art Nouveau. And Art Nouveau was an art movement where decorative surfaces and decoration started to play an important part. And Art Nouveau kind of crossed the line in between the decorative arts and fine arts. And they will use fine art concepts and brought it into design. So a lot of wallpapers design, a lot of like furniture design, fabric, textile design, you know, was really big in Art Nouveau movement. And also architecture began to play a big role in it. And even lamps, they started to design lamps with like Art Nouveau style. So the painting is inspired by Art Nouveau, which is very graphic, very decorative, and it is very beautiful, very poetic. So I got my sun shape, and then I figured we could do some sort of like graphic curve lines here that could translate maybe as like the glow from the sun elevating from the middle towards the sky. So very gently, I'm gonna just draw some curves that follow the sun's contour. So maybe we do another one, and you know, we may not end up drawing this out later. Sometimes we need to see what things look like so that we can respond to it later on when we paint. Maybe this one doesn't go all the way. I'll show you what I'm doing so far. If you only have watercolor right now, you can also do this with watercolor. That's completely fine. So this is what we got going on. And then I'm thinking about being very graphic and do like the sun, the rays of the sun, like an illustration. So this doesn't happen in real life, correct? Like we don't see the rays of the sun sticking out like lines in the world. But, you know, as an illustration and as artists, these are symbols that for the viewer, they would read those as rays. So what I'm doing is just placing some general location for things so that when we paint later on, we have an easier time knowing where to go, and then we can focus more on the color mixing and not so much on the actual design and the composition any longer. So once we have everything laid out like so, I'm going to show you how you can use the masking fluid medium. Now, the masking fluid medium, you may not have this, and that is okay. I'm going to feature it and I'm going to use it, but and that way you'll know how to use it later on. So masking fluid is a medium that is going to assist you into blocking out whichever area you want to, so that when you paint over it, you know, that area stays the same color as the paper, the white of the paper. And then when the layer of paint dries, you can actually peel the masking fluid medium. So in order to do that, I'm going to apply a little bit of masking medium in a ramekin right here. I don't like dipping my brushes inside of the masking fluid. Typically, the brushes will have paint residue, and then you don't want to insert anything into the fluid medium, right? You want to try to keep that as clean and hermetic as possible. And I only need, I'm only going to use a little bit. So the places where I applied, go ahead.
Hey, Noreen is asking if it's the same as watercolor masking fluid. I did tell them in the chat that they could use watercolor masking fluid if they didn't have the Liquitex masking fluid, but can you clarify?
Yeah, it is very similar. Typically, the watercolor masking fluid is going to be a little bit thicker, and it's going to probably be like a yellow color. That's the one that sells the most, although there are 3 different types of masking fluid medium that Winsor Newton, for example, has. But the one that, again, that is more popular is the yellow one. So this is actually white. So it becomes a little bit similar, you know, in finish to this. But yeah, you can try using that as long as you don't use it too thick. I think it probably would work, the masking that is used for watercolor painting. The only thing is that, of course, if you apply the ink or the paint, if you're using regular paint, if you apply that too thick, you're not going to be able to remove the masking fluid. So you always want to make sure that you're doing a paint layer application over the masking fluid, you know, in order to, that is very thin, in order to be able to remove this once this dries. So just a little tiny bit right here, not much. And I have a little bit of soap right here. I do not want to ruin my brush. So the masking fluid is latex. That's pretty much what it is. You also want to be careful if you have a latex allergy with this product, and maybe you want to use gloves to protect your hands. It is latex based, and what's going to happen is that it's going to stick to the paper very well, but it will stick to my brush bristles. And sure, this is a cheap brush, but I still want to be able to use it more than just once. So in order to protect it, I coated with a little bit of clear dish soap, just a little bit, not much. And I just sort of like remove any excess of it. And then when I dip into my masking here, I sort of protected the bristles, and I'm going to have an easier time cleaning this up. You don't want to leave the masking fluid sitting in your brushes for too long, because then you will definitely ruin your brushes. So I'm going to selectively place the masking fluid in some of the areas where I do want to have very sharp, clean areas that will remain the white of the paper. So as you could see here, this was the masking fluid, and so forth. So very carefully, I'm just gonna go ahead and follow some of these areas of the design. Something that you wanna know is that it actually really matters what kind of paper you're using for this, if you're using a masking medium. Because if you're using a paper that is too thin, or that is not appropriate for acrylic like this or watercolor, when you peel the masking fluid later, you may end up tearing the paper or ripping the top layer of the paper. So the quality of the paper that you're using and the type of paper that you're using really matters when you're using masking medium. So sometimes some people may remove the masking medium, and then after that they tear it, and then it's not the masking medium fault. It's probably the paper. Maybe it was just too thin to begin with, or not appropriate for this material. And I think besides the rays here, some of this glow lines that I created, I also want them to be white. And then also around the sun, and perhaps maybe in the water, I can use it also to sort of like simulate reflections. I think that could be fun. What do you all think? So of course, this is white, so it is easy to, you know, have a little bit of a hard time seeing it. I'm gonna put it a little closer, maybe I can show you. Now that I'm putting it like this in an angle, you can see a little bit better, right, where I'm locating it. It's going to dry slightly shiny at the beginning. And I think that helps so that we can
Yellow in watercolor is so popular because you can actually see it on the paper. It also,
right.
Different brands also make it in blue.
So that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have seen it in blue too. So we got one curve. I'm gonna do another one. And then you do need to wait for this to dry. So you don't need to actually use this. It doesn't have to be too thick for it to work, by the way. Another reason why sometimes the fluid masking medium may tear paper could have been that maybe it was applied too thick. Sometimes that could happen. So there may be a little bit of a learning curve when you first, you know, introduce masking fluid into your painting, into your practice. So there goes another one right here. Masking fluid is it's a lot of fun. I find that it's such a great tool. And it gives me a lot of freedom, because if I really want to retain some areas of the paper white, but I'm covering it with this, you know, I'm blocking it with this, I don't have to be careful when I'm painting, you know, for that not to be covered, because it will not, because it acts as a sort of resist, I would say. Let's see. Maybe I'll do another one on the actual, out of the actual sun shape. And something that I've noticed about this medium in comparison to other brands is that it actually doesn't dry as fast on my container here. I find that sometimes other brands will start to get gummy real fast, and I really like that about this one. It is fairly liquidy, so I'm able to, I have more open time with it. So I do appreciate that. And I'm doing a little bit more in this area, and this is when I'm going to start to use the masking as a sort of like tool to help me create like reflections in the water from the environment, from the sun or what have you. So I'm just doing very like short strokes of different sizes throughout the water. If you can see a little bit of that when I tilt it against the light. So this could be very spontaneous, right? And if you make too many of them, you know, later on you can always peel them off and cover with paint. If you went overboard with it, if you got carried away and did too many.
Daniela, Blue was asking if they don't have masking fluid, it is okay just to use white paint for now.
Well, the white paint is not going to mask for you, but you could use it later on, like to create those highlights. Yeah, instead of the The masking, absolutely. So once you have laid out the color, then you can use the white for the areas that I have here rather than the masking. Another way, I know something else that is, but it's a little bit harder, is to actually leave this the white of the paper and paint around it. But that could be a little bit of a, you know, that has a little bit more of a layer of difficulty to just carefully paint around the white of the paper. But yeah, white paint will function perfectly fine. So once you are done doing the application, make sure that you wash your brush right away. You know, just try to really remove all of that masking medium out of it. And then I like to sometimes just feel it with my finger so that I know that there's no residue there. But the, you know, the dish soap trick is just wonderful. It really helps to coat your brush. Okay, so I'm done with my chip brush for now. And because I know that I'm not going to be using the masking medium anymore, I'm just going to go ahead and just use a paper towel and wipe it off. I don't want to throw something like this down the drain. You always want to protect your, you know, your water system and your pipes in your home by trying to not throw any paint down the drain, and cleaning everything as much as possible with paper towels or with, like, you know, old t-shirts or something, and dumping them in the trash rather than washing it down the sink. That's preferably for the best for the environment and for your water system. So this is going to take a little bit to dry. In the meantime, I do want to show you what this would look like when I peel it. So I have an example right over here of an application of the masking fluid with paint over it. As you could see here, the areas that are lighter, where you see these brush strokes, that is masking fluid. And this has been done already for a few hours. So it should be ready for me to peel. It probably wouldn't take too long for it to dry. It usually takes about, I don't know, depends on how thin you apply. It could be anywhere from 10 minutes or maybe a little bit more. And you want to have your hands quite clean, but you could also use an eraser, or they also make very specific tools to peel masking medium. So just by using my finger, I was able to remove this section right here. So you could see how, you know, wherever I place that masking fluid, I'm getting a very definite, emphatic, and sharp edge shape. So the edges are not going to be soft or blurry. They're going to be very, very precise. So it's a really great tool to, you know, you can actually use it as a drawing tool and make a drawing with masking fluid with your brush. And then you can paint a layer of either watercolor or acrylic inks. And then you have a line drawing that is, you know, with the white of the paper. So you could see like the range of possibilities that the acrylic masking fluid offers.
Daniela, do you see any advantage using a rubber cement pickup versus your finger to remove the?
Yeah, I do. I think that, of course, some of us might be sensitive with our hands to do that. And a lot of times some of us may have like some oils in our hands, you know, like natural oils. That's like, we're humans, we're healthy, we have natural oils in our hands. So you don't want to transfer. If that's the case for you, you probably are better off not transferring those oils into your surface so that it doesn't interfere with your painting process. But, you know, often than not, I usually have my hands, I try my hands to be clean, and then I have paper towels and I just clean up my hands before I do it. And I do use my finger, but it could be a little bit hard to do it sometimes. So a rubber cement, you know, block or eraser, pickup eraser would probably work pretty good for that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and talk about inks a little bit, and I can show you some of the inks attributes, and then we'll go from there. So the inks are a really wonderful medium. They're acrylic based. So sometimes people ask, well, what is the difference between acrylic inks and other inks, inks that are not acrylic? Well, for once, the Liquitex acrylic inks are pigment based. So pigments are substances. Typically, they are going to be found in both organic, like for example, chemically done in a laboratory, comes from petrochemical based processes. Those are your synthetics. And then you're also going to have some pigments that come from the natural world. Like for example, we have there's a color that used to be very popular, but not so much anymore. It's called Indian yellow. And Indian yellow comes from feeding cows a very strict diet of mango leaves. Cows urinate into a bucket, and then the solid particles will separate from the liquid, and then they will make like small stones about the size of a small apple, and then they will actually make paint out of that, because pigments they're particles, they're solid particles. This is an example of a pigment right here. This is a permanent pigments, originally from Liquitex too, but we don't make pigments like this anymore, but they're powder form right over here. So this particular color was synthetically made in a laboratory, but again, there's many different sources where you can get pigment from. For example, carbon black, that's just like charred wood. Ivory black is charred bones. So again, there's multiple sources for pigments. They are solid particles, so they're not soluble. So soluble are things like, for example, salt, and for example, sugar. When you mix this with water, salt and sugar, you're actually, dissolving it completely, right? That's what soluble means. Pigments are not soluble. So our acrylic paints, all of them, including the inks, are made with pigments. They're not soluble. The next thing that you want to know is the largest part of our colors are going to be light fast. And light fast basically means that the colors, the pigments are resistant to the UV rays. Our chemists in the laboratory, they do a great job testing all of the pigments to make sure that they are light fast, resistant to the UV rays. So all that information you can definitely find in the back of the bottles. So I'm going to show you a little bit where that information is, so that you can read the label and understand and see that. So when we look at this right here, the rubine red, if I turn the bottle up this way, right at the middle is going to say light fastness. So it says light fastness 2, which is very good. So they're going to have a category to them. And let's check out this color, see what it looks like. It has a wonderful dropper. This is another thing that I really love about our inks, is the dropper. I can control how much paint I apply. Now we're working with watercolor paper, so I can actually thin this out further just with water. We do have a medium that I use all the time that I will not be using today, but I can tell you a little bit about it in case you're curious. It's called a airbrush medium. And typically I use that instead of water, even when I'm working on paper. There's something to say about acrylic paint, that acrylic paint is made with pigments. You have the polymer. Okay, the polymer is basically like a resin, it's a plastic. And, it is this plastic, it's actually the binding agent. It's the binder that makes sure that the solid particles stick to one another when the paint dries, and they stick to the surface right over here. So if we add too much water to our paint, if we dilute our paint so much, we're actually compromising the integrity and the binding quality of the paint. So, you know, in acrylic, we like to recommend to only adding up to 20%, no more than 20% of water, especially when you're working on canvas, you know, a surface that has been primed. Because when a surface has been primed, what happens is that the paint actually sits on top. So the paint actually sits on top of the canvas, but we're working on watercolor. So the paint is actually going to be absorbed a little bit by the paper, which means that the fibers of the watercolor paper are going to help us for the pigment particles to bind to one another and to get deposited or anchored into the surface. So I'm not too afraid of adding more water than normal to my paints when I'm working on watercolor paper, because the watercolor paper is porous. If it was canvas, I will definitely have added this much amount of water to my surface, because I'm breaking down the adhesive qualities of my binder, and I want to avoid that. Let's try the phthalocyanine blue. Other really important information to know is that the pigments, some of them are transparent, some of them are going to be opaque, and some of them are going to be semi. And this one right here, when you look at the little square, it's just an outline. This pigment is transparent. Now, this doesn't have nothing to do with how much medium or maybe liquid is in here to the ratio of pigment, because there is a ratio for each color. It actually has to do with the nature of the pigment itself. Phthalocyanine blue at the microscopic level is actually transparent. It's actually a very powerful color, as transparent as it is. It's very, very heavy tinting. And you could see it from the screen. It's so dark that it almost looks black. Yes, I saw there was a question by Lisa. Lisa, the airbrush medium is actually wonderful with inks. That's what I use myself when I work with inks. Even when I work with paper, I like to use the airbrush medium. And when I work with canvas, I definitely use the airbrush medium to thin down my paint if I'm trying to do some washes. But notice how powerful it is. Even though I added water, it just it really retains its strength. So the amount of water that takes from this pigment to thin out, has to be greater than to the robine red. So it's just a stronger pigment by nature. The next color that I'm going to show you is one of our fluorescents. Now, there are several of these colors in the new, all of the new colors that just came out recently. There's a fluorescent pink, fluorescent blue, fluorescent red, fluorescent green, fluorescent orange, and then the one that I'm using right now. So these are really like fluorescent for real. Like if you have a blue light or a black light, they actually will glow in the dark. So if you're ever doing any kind of like installation or like decorations that will be outdoors at night, you can actually take advantage of this and make something with it. It is very powerful, as you could see. It's very, very bright, very saturated. So it really catches the viewer's eyes, right? Now, there's something to say about, about fluorescent colors is that the light fastness on them is not rated. So when we compare like the Rubine red and then we turn the bottle right over here, we see that it says light fastness, very good. When we look at the fluorescent color, it's going to say light fastness, not rated, not ASTM rated. So these colors are not rated for light fastness because they're really not pigment based. They're actually dye based. These are the only colors on the range that are dye based, and it is because they're fluorescent. So fluorescent colors are actually not high resistant to the UV rays. They are actually sensitive. So that is important to know when you are using any fluorescent color. And that has nothing to do with the brand. All fluorescent colors are going to be that way because they are dye-based And that, that's the technology that is available. So if I was to expose this color to the UV rays, and by that I mean like literally place it outside, outdoors for a while, and then come back to it, the fluorescent quality is actually going to wash off. You will not lose the color, it will still be yellow, but you're going to lose the glow. So that is very important to know. So anything that's fluorescent, you probably don't want to hang it next to a window where the sun is going to be hitting it directly, right? And here's an example of a board that was painted with fluorescent orange. And then this side right here on the right was exposed to the UV rays for about, I think it was, how long? 21 hours. 21 hours outside under the sun. And then of course, it lost its fluorescent quality. So all fluorescents are going to be sensitive to the UV rays. Okay. And that is specified in the label. Now, just one more thing to mention about light fastness, everybody, is that with the rating of light fastness, there's going to be also an excellent rating. So again, if you look at your paint, your acrylic paint, look for that. What is the light fast? And if you're doing a mural, you probably want to try to use the pigments that have the highest light fast rate, right? So I would use light fast 1, which is excellent. But if you're doing an artwork that's going to be placed or hanged indoors, either light fast 1 or light fast 2 is perfectly appropriate. There's no issues with that. Yeah, the iridescent inks are, thank you, Lydia, for the question. The iridescent inks are actually also rated light fastness. So if we look at this one right here, this one is iridescent rose gold. It's beautiful, by the way. Turn it around. Light fastest. Oh, wow, wait a minute. Let's see. Oh, well, yeah, of course. The it's also not rated. So you will it's actually sensitive to the ASTM, to the UV rays. So it's not rated as well. So it's a similar vein. We're having the same category here for the iridescent. So that iridescent pearlescent quality will diminish with the UV rays as well as with the fluorescent ink. Thank you for the question. But the rest of the colors, the ones that are non-iridescent or fluorescent, are actually resistant to an extent, right? So think about it this way, no color is going to last forever, right? It's not going to last forever, but they are tested for about 100 years in chambers by the chemists. So they would last about 100 years under regular lighting conditions. And by that I mean indoors, hanging on a wall, and so forth. If there are murals outside, there's not really a way for me to tell you specifically how long they would last, because we don't know what kind of conditions, what kind of weather they are under. So that is a little bit harder to gauge. So the tests are done to replicate regular lighting conditions and to also replicate about 100 years or so of exposure, except for this one because it's dye-based, and the iridescent, because of the iridescent metallic quality, will actually be affected by the UV rays. I'm gonna put this away.
I just want to add to that, Danielle. Thank you. I just add that if you're framing your work, framing with UV glass is another way to protect your work and extend the life.
If the work is framed,
colors.
You can request for UV ray protective glass at the frame shop. Absolutely. You can definitely do that. All right, so let's go ahead and let's go back to our painting, which it should be somewhat dry right now. And I can show you also some just like very basic painting techniques. Since everybody here is probably at different levels of experience, I think it's useful to show you just some application, some general paint application to make you feel a little bit comfortable when you are painting with yours. So something that you could do, of course, is directly apply the paint to the canvas straight from the color to the surface or to the paper. I'm just actually placing a little bit of each color into a different well so that I have them separated. And I could also mix some secondary colors in between. I find it really useful to have some colors mixed along the way. Now I probably won't need as much of the blue because it's so powerful, that phthalo cyan. This is red shade again. So there you're gonna find different, you'll find green shade and then you find red shade. So this is red shade. Right here, similar to my color wheel, yellow, blue, and my red. Those are my primary colors. Now, if you have more colors, please feel free to use your colors as well. If you don't want to mix as much, that's fine. So one thing that you could do is to apply water onto your watercolor paper like so, just a coat of water. Like this. So I'm just basically painting a square with clean water. We want to try to use clean water rather than the dirty water. So that's why I like to have more than 1 cup. Okay. And I can just very much go straight from any of these colors and apply it on top. I'm going to grab a little bit of that Rubine red, only apply it to the top edge, and it's going to quickly dissipate and spread down because the whole area was wet. So just doing a little bit of testing right now to show you, if I want to create a really clean application, I can actually also use this and drag my color down. And I have a really nice, sort of like a flat application. And again, there was water on my first layer. So of course the painting, the color is not going to be as strong as if I was applying it directly on the paper without the water. But I really like this, because another thing that I appreciate here is that the paper that I'm using is cold press. So the pigment particles are going to probably separate a little bit and they're going to get deposited into the grooves of the paper. And I'm gonna have a little bit of almost like a crackling like effect, which could be really fun to do. If you are an artist who likes very slick finish, then maybe something that you could do is actually use a hot press paper, which will actually give you a more slick, flat finish. So, to each its own, whatever your preference is. And if I want to create a sort of gradient, just maybe I'll do a little gradient here for you to show you. I like to start with a light color. I find that a little bit easier when I'm doing a gradient. That's my personal method. Everybody may have their own. And I do an application of my water again. And one thing that's tricky is that how do you know how much water you need? And I think that just comes with experience. If you have a lot of water, your paint is going to spread out really quick when you apply it. If you have less water, then the painting will travel slower and you may be able to control it a little more. So you may need to probably be a little bit experimental. This is new to you, to see what happens, to see how much water is too much water, or if it's too little water, then that next time you just do a little stronger. So I went in with the yellow at the top edge. And because I didn't have as much water as the one on top, but I think somebody needs to be muted. Thank you very much. There we go. So I'm bringing it down as I go down, and I'm going to stop at some point because I do want to bring some of the red from the bottom to the top. The one thing is that I got to work a little fast because my water starts to dry in my surface. And then it gets a little bit harder to blend it. If I wanted more pigment, I just got my brush more color and I bring it up. But if I continue this way, then I'm going to make it too dark. So I want some sort of diffused effect. So I like to use my paper towel and I pad, and then I bring the color slowly. If I want to integrate this with the yellow a little bit more, I think I need more yellow. But I can do that. So I dip in my yellow a little bit and we bring it down. Now, the thing about this is that if I overwork it and I keep on going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it's going to get kind of funny here because it starts to dry. So at some point, you got to say, well, I need to stop because it's just going to get messy. And then you see what it looks like. And then you learn from the process. And the next time you do it, then you get better, and so forth. So I've done this a few times in my life. So I'm able to control and understand how the paint works. And of course, depending on the type of paint that you're using, there will be variations, whether it's watercolor or the ink. You can create pretty great watercolor effects with the ink. It's not exactly like watercolor, right? Because the ink is permanent. It's acrylic paint. So as you know, once this dries, this is permanent. This is not going anywhere. I'm not going to be able to lift it like you would lift watercolor, right? It's permanent. So that is a good distinction in between watercolor paint and acrylic paint. Well, let's go ahead, now that I've shown you a flat application and more of like a layering application, let's go ahead and work on this a little bit and see how far we can take it. Maybe I'm gonna get rid of this so I can use the space for my colors. Okay. So there's not a formula, or I don't have a formula on how you should start a painting, right? There's many ways to start a painting. Like, where do you begin? Like, some people say, oh, you should begin from background to foreground. Some people say, well, you should begin from the dark colors first and then the lighter colors. So there's all kinds of methods that artists have developed depending on their personal preference. If you're working with watercolor, then watercolor has very specific rules. Watercolor to me is one of the hardest mediums to work with because it is very temperamental and it is always awake, it's always reacting. But we're not working with watercolors, we're working with acrylics. So once our layer dries, we can layer over it if we don't like it. We can shift it a little bit, we can change it. We are, however, trying to emulate the effect of watercolor by making our paint very transparent. So I have lots of little containers everywhere that I'm gonna use in case I wanna thin out my ink so that I can have really nice washes over here. So I will begin actually with this bottom area right here, and I'll begin with the ocean just a little bit. And I think it could be interesting to just do a little bit of a warm application of maybe like a gray that is a little bit kind of like a grayed out color. And I think I can achieve that by mixing a little bit of the blue with the yellow, which of course is going to give us a green. However, I believe that if I add a little water to it, I might get like somewhat of a grayed out green. So I'm mixing it in between the two colors because I think that's more practical. So that I know that, okay, this color came from this too, and I know where to find it next time. And if you have the dropper, you can also directly do it from the dropper. I just want to, be economical and use the colors that I already have there. Just gently mix it. And of course, we could see that we get a somewhat of a bright green. Now, this is a very intense green. If I want to knock down the intensity of this green, this is something very simple that you could do. You can go across your color wheel right up here. This is red. And if I add a tiny bit of red to this color, I'm actually going to knock that color down. It's going to be less intense, meaning it will be more muted, less saturated. So I can easily do that. I take a tiny bit of red, add it here, and I mix it, and I start gauging what it looks like. So it will probably end up looking slightly brownish, and depending on how much red you add, then it will be, you know, more brown than not. But I still want it to feel like a green. You could see it's almost like a muddy green. And I want that. So I'm adding a little bit of water to this. And I have a plastic pipette. These are actually highly recommended when you're trying to dilute things so that you don't just grab the cup and dump in there, which then you could have like a spill. So I like that because it helps me control things. And for the sake of feeling more comfortable with what I'm doing, I always like to have scrap paper around, and I taste my colors. I test them to see what they look like. And I'm like, okay, well, do I want to use that for my painting? Should it be a little bit more blue, or should it be a little bit more, you know, warmer? What do I want to do to it? So this is a time where we can decide, like, what do I want to use? And like I said at the beginning, I'm really not going to make a naturalistic looking painting. It's going to be a very colorful, not realistic work. So I'm adding a tiny more blue because it got slightly more muddy than what I wanted. And that's fine. Okay. And I might like that better. Let's see. Ooh. So it is like a grayed out blue, right? It's still dark because there's a lot of pigment, but I can always dilute it with more water. So this is, I think, a color that I'm interested in using. And of course, you know, you can always buy more colors directly, you know, from the brand and not have to mix that much. But it's nice to, you know, to learn how to do some basic color mixing. So I'm going to use this color for some areas, like the stones, maybe. So what I'm thinking about, everybody, I think I'm gonna paint the ones that are closer to us, like down here to the viewer, this color, and the ones that are farther away, I'm gonna make them a little bit lighter by actually adding more water to my mix. So when we think about distance in landscape, the things that are farther away get a little bit gloomy, right? Because of the atmosphere. And there's actually less contrast. So contrast is when we look at something against something else, and they are quite opposite to one another. For example, dark versus light. When there's little contrast, we have, you know, colors that are not so dark or not too light, so they're closer to one another. So when things are farther away, there's actually a little bit less contrast than when things that are closer because of atmospheric perspective. If I want to make this darker, what I could do, instead of adding more color to this mixture, I can actually layer it. And if I layer this with a transparent color, that's called a glaze. So that's called a glaze. So you can glaze this and make it deeper if you want to. And I do want to make the ones that are closer darker. And as I go back, I'm going to make them a little lighter. So glazing is a good way to get deeper colors just by layering. And again, once this dries, then I can glaze again. So, you know, how many times you want to glaze, you can. All right, move on to the back area. I'm going to do the little ridge on the right, same color, but I'm going to actually take my dropper right here and add a little bit water to this container, make it slightly more transparent. And I want to see what it looks like. If it's too transparent and I change my mind, I decide, you know what, I think it should be darker. All I gotta do is like layer it, you know? So sometimes I find it useful. This is just like a tip as a maker, you know? Sometimes I find it useful to make things slightly lighter than what you think they should be, so that if you need to go darker, you're still able to. So that's just a good practice to keep in mind. So for now, I'm feeling okay about it. I'm gonna make this slightly darker. I think that could be good. More impact. Right here at the bottom, you know, the bottom edge of these areas, I think I'm gonna just do like a slightly darker line to imitate shadows in the bottom. So that kind of creates the effect of this being hit by some sort of light, right? When we see a little bit of shadows in the bottom. And it's very loose. It's not, you know, we're not being too fuzzy about it. And you notice that I'm using quite a thick brush. I'm just used to using bigger brushes, but you could be using a small, delicate brush if you're nervous about, you know, the tip being too thick for what you're trying to achieve. That's fine too. Now, the mountain on the back, I want to do it slightly different color. I want to make it a little bit warmer because it is closer to the sun. So I'm thinking, well, if it's closer to the sun, maybe back here, it's a little bit warmer because this is quite cold, right? This like grayed out blue. So there's a couple things that I could do. I could mix a new color for it, or I can take advantage of what I have here already. And maybe I can add a little bit of yellow to it and a little bit of red and warm it up a little bit. So let's try that. I could just explore and see what that looks like. So I'm just dipping a little bit of the Rubine red, just a tiny bit right here. And of course, I'm gonna get more like a purple right now. That was expected. So that's very bright. Definitely don't want that, but I'm not done yet. If I take a little more of the same color that I had earlier, and then I add a tad of yellow, I might achieve something warmer. So let's just see what this looks like right now. It's gonna look like a purple, as you could see. So we know, you know, that if we mix blue and red, we get a purple. If we mix a purple with a little bit of yellow, we actually get more like a brown. So I'm adding some of my fluorescent here. But this brown, it's pretty warm. So by warm, I mean it's leaning towards yellow or towards red. And when I say cool, I mean that it's leaning towards blue. So this is what it turned out like. I want to use this for this area. So it's a warmer brown. It's almost like also like a greenish color. I'm just gonna do a flat application first. And please ask me any questions. Okay. So while that settles there, you know, we want to think about addressing other areas of this painting so that we make the most out of our time. And because, and this is something to keep in mind, everybody, because some of this area might still be moist. And I don't want the colors to blend into one another, right? If you place wet paint next to this, because I applied that recently, they're gonna bleed into one another. I wanna avoid that. Maybe it's a good idea for me to work on this top area and be very strategic with my time. So when I'm working like this, I'm always thinking about like strategy, you know, what should I do next? Where should I paint? How can I maximize my work time? So I'm gonna go ahead and actually use green-like colors up here and maybe gray-like colors up here, but very diluted. So I'm gonna continue to use this really nice mixture that I made earlier, my grayed out blue. And I just played a little bit right over there so that I can add more water later. I'm also gonna mix a green right here with the fluorescent and the phthalo blue. Phthalo blue, again, friendly reminder, is super strong. And I don't want to dip my dirty brush inside of the fluorescent yellow because I'm going to be using the fluorescent yellow on its own later. So I'm just going to take from the dropper and apply just a couple of drops and see how I like it. If it needs to be, you know, more green, then I'll just add more of that fluorescent yellow. So yeah, I need more because as we know, the phthalo blue is quite strong. So it really takes over. Okay, so now I have a really nice green right here. It's actually quite dark, as you could see. So I will dilute it with water. Both of these colors, actually. There we go. Very thin. So when you dilute the ink with water and you apply like so on the paper, you're probably gonna hear people calling that a wash. W-A-S-H, wash. All right, this green is very strong, but I think I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna be very spontaneous with this. I'm going to just basically lay it down. Now, when I apply the paint right now, I'm actually, rather than adding too much color, I'm actually using the side of my brush and I'm grazing it like this over the paper. So you see how I'm getting a little bit of texture there? That's called dry brushing. So rather than having a lot of paint and going like this, which you could do, it's up to you how you want to apply it, I'm just going to try out this right here, the dry brushing, to get a textured effect. If you're nervous about it, you can of course do that on a testing sheet. And I'm doing this because I want some of the white of the paper to show through so that when I apply the next color over it, I'm able to actually, you know, layer it and the colors could be separated somehow. So just a little bit of application like so. I'm gonna continue to use that color to maybe define some sort of activity, mist-like activity, or to give us some movement. And then always washing my brush in between. I'm gonna go past to the next color. I'm sure this is still wet, so some colors may bleed into one another. So if you don't want that, then the typical thing to do will be to wait. But if you're not too precious about it and you actually want a little bit of movement, you could go ahead and let them and allow them to bleed and see what kind of like accidents you get that could be useful. So I'm just very strategically placing it in some of the blank areas with understanding that, sure, they will bleed a little bit here and there. And if I want this to be a little bit softer, I could actually add a little bit of water to my brush, some clean water, and maybe soften it up a little bit by painting over it with some clean water. Since it's still moist, I'm able to diffuse that a little bit. Okay, so I got something there going on for me. I believe that hopefully, let's see, this is probably already starting to dry. So something else that I could do now is actually paint my sun. So for this, I actually used, of course, the Rubine Red, but I added just a touch, not too much, of the phthalo blue. And I got a red that wasn't as strong as this one. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm gonna do the same thing. We will be adding water to this mix because we want that to be quite transparent. A little bit of blue, just a gentle amount. I'm gonna just, it's a smidge, not that much. Okay. And now that I got it to be a little bit less warm, because I added blue to it, right? I'm getting more like a magenta here now. I was gonna add a good amount of water to get a nice transparent mixture. Here, I'm gonna test it out. So this is a good time to ask yourself, do you like that color or not? So you can make decisions based on what that looks like on your test paper. Very carefully, I'm gonna go ahead and just lay this color down. And as the paint's still wet, as I'm working, I should not get streaks. So there it is. And before I apply the glowy area, I'm gonna let that to dry a little bit. So I'm gonna work on my bottom part. So as you could see, I'm working in sections. So I will go ahead and use some of this color, which is the funky green color, some of this other brighter color, this one right here for the ocean. And then once that dries, I'm gonna actually add some of the Rubine red over it and then some of the fluorescent yellow over it as if the sun is glowing on the ocean. So that's my plan. Sometimes we don't know if it's gonna work out until we actually do it, but that's how art works. And I'm just, I had some water in my brush to make my paint slightly more transparent. I want to keep it somewhat transparent. So very light application there. Go ahead and use this color too, this kind of like grayed out blue. And because this sun should reflect in some areas here, I could try to introduce some of this color that I have mixed that I use for the sun right in this area. So that's fun. So just little glimpses here or there. And because this is wet, it's going to be quite soft, the application. It's going to be a little bit blurry, right? So you'll get some nice soft edges. So something to think about when you're painting are variety of edges. Do you want everything to be sharp? Or do you want variety of edges, meaning some of them could be blurry, soft, and some of them could be sharp? So those are concepts to explore in art making. A variety of edges. Ooh, I got carried away with the pink and I put it everywhere because it's so pretty. I wanna give the fluorescent yellow a chance, so I'm gonna stop there before I overwork it. Something else that I think is getting a little bit lost now are these colors because I added color there. So I'm gonna push that contrast even more. Just adding another layer, more glazing here. That should help. Just make it a little bit darker. so it stands out. So it's starting to get a little lost. Okay, cool. So let's introduce the fluorescent yellow and see what that can do for us. And I want to make sure that I clean my brush quite nicely, carefully. Go over here. And pretty much I'm just going to go from the edge. Whoa, that's bright. And work my way up. I'm going to keep it intense at first. When I reach the area where I want it to be diffused, I'm actually going to grab a little bit of water, place it on a separate container. Oh, that's dirty. I want to grab clean water. Hold on. There's my clean one. There we go. Go in here. And then I just work on that way to diffuse it and make it more transparent. So now I'm bringing the yellow up here, but more transparent so that it somewhat blends a little bit with the top area that I have previously painted. And you can now see how the masking, you know, you can really see it because it retains the color of the paper. We can see it through. So everything that you see here that's not covered with paint is this way because of the masking. To unify this painting, I think it's important to bring some of this yellow glow to this area right here, right? So I could use a little bit of my fluorescent again and just kind of gently apply it somewhere. If it's too strong, you can pat it with a little bit of a napkin while it's still wet to make it a little bit weak, or you can simply dilute it with a little bit of water. So it's all about dilution, layering, working in stages, and so forth. It turned out quite differently from the one that I did originally, which is expected. I want to darken this a little bit over here. Just that edge, ever so slightly. Oh, I'm afraid of going overboard. So there we go. A little bit less color. Just that edge of the sun. So that it stands out a little more. And this right here, this is looking too brownish. I think this should also be affected by this color. Maybe I could do a transparent wash of this color over this area and see what that looks like. So simply adding more water might help me to do that. Oh, too much color. There we go. So what I'm working on is I'm trying to unify everything a little bit more, right? And by unifying, it's just I'm trying for it all to tie together so that things don't feel disjointed or separate. So I think sometimes bringing a little bit of one color somewhere else and going back and forth like that is very, very helpful. It's almost done. What do y'all think? Any questions, comments, observations?
I think carrying through the color, that pink, especially in the front and the water, I mean, makes a huge difference.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think thinking about color that way and how you can use it as a compositional element, not just to describe what you're trying to paint, but also as a way to drag the viewer's eye throughout the composition is actually quite useful. I actually think I need some red up here.
I was thinking the same.
This is the time when I usually overwork the painting.
Sure, of course, same.
And it goes wrong.
Right? I think we're all guilty of that.
I need pink everywhere, or like I need this color everywhere. But you know, I won't know until I do it. Like how, you know, it's just one of those things. Just a little bit. Okay.
Right. There you go. That looks good.
So the next step that I would do, everybody, of course, I will remove the adhesive, but I'll do that when it's wet, just to prevent for anything being moist in contact with this tearing the paper. And then I will make sure that this is fully dry. And then I will gently peel the masking tape to reveal the areas that I had left white, so that I end up with something like this. All right. So I'm open to questions if anybody has anything to add. But I was going to say just one more mention right over here. Something that you could do with the gold metallic medium is you can actually layer it on top. But you want, like I personally would want to wait for this to be dry to do that, so that it doesn't mix with some of the colors. So I can show you very briefly how you could do that here, because it's actually quite beautiful. You can also do it with the silver, but I do think the gold would be beneficial with the colors that I have going on. And I'll just take a little bit of my gold medium. Now the gold medium is just like any medium with acrylic. You can mix it with color, or you can apply it over a painting if you wanted to. And you can do some gentle touches in some areas, because it is cold, it's going to warm up the areas. It is a little transparent, so you will end up getting almost like a glazed effect. So this could be like a way for you to like further accent or decorate different parts of your painting, or to warm it up. So when I add it here at the edge of the sun, I'm actually making that red more like an orange in some areas. See if it's apparent up close.
What is opening?
So you can play around with that at your leisure. I can add it to the glow up here, or you could do it with the silver if you don't want to warm things up, if you want to cool it down, right? The silver is going to have more of a cooling effect. If I cover the whole sun with it, I might just ruin my painting. No, I don't think so. I think it's going to look great. But it's going to change the color palette, right? The original color structure that I began with. But I'm just warming things up a little bit. So it's a really nice medium to play with, to mess around with. Again, you can mix it with a color, you can layer over the painting, or you can just use it alone. Okay.
Danielle, I just want to let you know that it's 2:36 and no rush, but
yeah,
I
pretty
know
much
that we have had you know, some folks that had to leave at 1:30. So if there's anything, or sorry, after an hour and a half. So if there's anything that you wanted to get in there.
Yeah, no, I am completely finished with the execution of the project. I just wanted to say, if there's any questions, please shoot. You could also reach me in my Instagram page, which is, I'm going to put it in the chat, is Daniela Campins studio, Daniela Campins studio. Oops, I can't type it right now. Okay, so my Instagram is Daniela Campins studio, or you can also reach us, you know, all of us educators from TFAC at our TFAC North America. That is the one from Instagram as well. So those are different ways for you all to stay in touch with us and with me if you would like to, and ask any further questions. But we are completed with today's activity, and I really appreciate your time being here with us, and all of you that followed along or that just watched. Thank you for being here and hanging out.
Thank you, Daniela. We really, really appreciate you joining us today. And that was amazing. I mean, I learned so much, and I thought that, I learned something with everyone, but this one was really great. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we can't wait to have you back next year for the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. And thank you, Plaza, for having me, and everyone from all over the United States for coming in.
Absolutely. And it really is cool that we had people from, Canada and
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
I love that. Love, love, love that. I did just want to say for everyone that this the workshop was recorded, and anybody that registered for the event will receive an email tomorrow that has a link to the recording with a survey and then an exclusive coupon, which is good for, I believe, a week, that will give you a special discount on Liquitex products for, and so there's a, look out for that code if you're interested in making a purchase. Wait, you might want to wait until tomorrow when you get it. And then that's pretty much it. And I will see my friends again in February when our next event takes place. All right. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.